Hi everyone. Before we read another letter of Screwtape to Wormwood, he's speaking about time, and I thought maybe I would spend a few minutes reflecting on my view of time when I was a Jehovah's Witness and my view now as a Christian. So first, as a witness, how I viewed time. Anyone who's been a witness is familiar with the term getting your time in. So that does help an outsider to realize that for a witness, time was mostly, your concern was in doing preaching, in doing door-to-door activity, if you were a core Jehovah's Witness, if you believed and wanted to be in good with both the organization and with God, you felt you should be regularly doing door-to-door work, studying publications with people, bringing them into the witnesses. So regular attending of their meetings, which at that time they had 5 meetings over 3 different days. So all this took an awful lot of your time. So you didn't have a lot of spare time. You had to keep up with your literature reading, which is very little now, I realize, but at the time it seemed you had to keep that up. And then anything that you did outside of that time, I think you had a certain amount of feelings of guilt if you weren't doing things that were theocratic. So I did love people, so I thought this was the best use of my time, to be out trying to convince people to become Jehovah's Witnesses. I believed it, so that's what I tried to do. I became a pioneer, and I was motivated by love for people and love for God. I thought this is what God wanted me to do, that this would please Him, that I would be serving Him. My outside interests, I really limited somewhat to movie going a lot. We loved film, and I also loved children's literature and poetry. I liked art, but I didn't spend any time on that as a witness. I think anytime you did go into those areas, you had a measure of guilt. You know, could I have been using that time for more theocratic activities? And even after I got married and I found my energy level would not allow me to continue to be a pioneer, and I lowered the amount of time that I felt that I could keep up with in field service and still keep the home running and my part-time job, I felt guilt. And when I talked to other people who also found when they got older or when they had new responsibilities put on them, there was a measure of guilt attached to even normal things like marriage and children, family life, taking care of someone in the family. There was a feeling of guilt that you were misusing your time. So I thought now we could read Screwtape's advice about time to Wormwood for his patient. Here's what he says. My dear Wormwood, men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And the sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims on life, therefore, that your patient can be induced to make, the more often he will feel injured and as a result ill-tempered. Now you will have noticed that nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find a tract of time which he reckoned on having as at his own disposal unexpectedly taken from him. It angers him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. You must therefore zealously guard in his mind the curious assumption My time is my own. Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him feel as a grievous tax that portion of this property which has to be made over to his employers, and as a generous donation that further portion which he allows to religious duties. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is that the total from which these deductions have been made was, in some mysterious sense, his own personal birthright. You have here a delicate task. The assumption which you want him to go on making is so absurd that if once it is questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his chattels. He is also, in theory, committed to a total service of the enemy. And if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near it. Wrap a darkness about it. And in the center of the darkness, let his sense of ownership in time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from men's belief that they own their bodies, those vast and perilous estates pulsating with energy that made the worlds in which they find themselves without their consent, and from which they are rejected at the pleasure of another. So this is all about time. Of course, with the outside world, their time is used differently than witnesses. Christians will use their time differently. But I think this is something that we should all be thinking about, how we use our time. On leaving the organization, I have talked to many ex-witnesses who say they felt a relief, a burden lifted, freedom. They felt freedom. And I too felt a pressure had been lifted from me. I wasn't even aware of how much pressure was on me in my Jehovah's Witness life until it was removed from me. I did not miss the meetings, and I did not miss field service, and I was somewhat surprised that I would not have a feeling of missing those things. What I did miss was people, my family, and my friends, all of whom had been witnesses. That was my life before. So David and I did go through a period of time where we kind of were thinking, what do I do now? And I think at the beginning of our leaving of the Watchtower, our time was focused on re-education, and I would say also unlearning, especially for me, unlearning what I had learned as a witness, being able to find out whether or not what I'd been told was scriptural or truthful. That took a lot of unlearning. I think you stick with something until you've examined it and you replace it with something good, if it's bad, if it's wrong. That doesn't happen automatically. Otherwise, you just sort of hang on to ideas and just assume they're right. We have done some videos on the subject of what we felt like and what we did when we left the witnesses. So I will link those at the end of this video. What changed for me when I left the witnesses? I would say as a witness, I felt an obligation or duty. That was my focus, an obligation or duty to do certain things because I loved God and because I loved people. But I loved God and I wanted to please Him and I wanted to serve Him. But what the Watchtower had done was to make it a contractual deal here, not a relational reality. I now read with horror things in the Watchtower publications. For example, this book, the Knowledge book, it's called Knowledge That Leads to Everlasting Life. You might remember this one was one that we studied with people after the Truth book, I guess, or maybe even after another one, but we used to study this with people. This is their bottom line, this last paragraph in the book. If you love Jehovah, you will find delight in doing His will. As you pursue that course, what blessings you will experience. If you apply the knowledge of God, it can bring you a happier life even in this troubled world. The future rewards are immense, for this is the knowledge that leads to everlasting life. Now is the favorable time for you to act. Be determined to live in harmony with the knowledge of God. Demonstrate your love for Jehovah. Honor His holy name and prove Satan a liar. In turn, Jehovah God, the source of true wisdom and knowledge, will rejoice over you in His great and loving heart, and He will love you forever. So in the old days, when I was a witness, I would have read that without horror. Now I find horror here, because it's saying if you love God, He will react with loving you. This is not biblical. This is not the way the scriptures present God's love. Think of your own family life. Do I love my Max, my son, only when he does his chores? He's smiling here. Do I love David only if he fulfills a certain level of assignments or duties? It's the difference between family and boss and employee. That's the difference between what Christianity offers, what God offers, and what the Watchtower is offering. So that was a big change for me. So then I had to ask myself, well, what does God want? How much of my time does God want? Here is a passage that came to my mind when I was thinking about time and requirements and what God wants. And I found this passage in Micah 6:6-8, very instructive, because you can see parallels with the Watchtower and with the mindset of certain Israelites. So here's what the passage says. With what shall I come before the Lord, and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before Him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So in these requirements of sacrifices, some of the Israelites had become duty bound, and they felt, as long as I do these things, I'm in good with God. So you could replace some of these things about offerings as field service, meeting attendance, reading publications, not having children. I'll offer my firstborn, all my born, by not having children for the sake of doing the witness work. Is this what God is requiring of them? In this passage, He tells them what he does require of them. What he requires is for them to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Now, in some sense, my current feeling as a Christian is that God wants all of my time. He wants everything I have. And that sounds threatening, I guess, to a lot of people. It would sound like, oh, that's worse than what you had as a witness. But I don't view it that way. I view it as God has entrusted me with everything that I have. And so he wants me to use it for him and for others, to share what I have. So everything I have is entrusted to me from God. And so I feel it's much, again, like family life. There isn't a time when I'm not Max's mom, and there isn't a time when I'm not David's wife, that we're not a family. We don't have a, I'll be your mother during these times of the day. No, it's your life now. You've committed to a relationship, and so it's your life. You don't think about, this is mine and not yours. It's all together. So if we think of God that way, as a parent, and we are his children, when you're a parent, you're interested in what's good for your children. You're interested in their well-being. You want them to become whole people. You want them to become productive people, good people. God is the same in what he wants for us. He wants the best for us. And so I believe he loves us in that way. He is good, and he wants us to be mature and whole Christian men and women, fruitful people, contented people. And that comes with the relationship. It's not a duty, it's a love relationship. It's a family. I'm going to link 2 videos. One of them was my re-education. It's the first of 3 videos, first of 3 parts. Vivian's re-education after the Watchtower. And then David did one from his aspect of leaving the Watchtower. It's how I left the Watchtower and landed softly. And his is a 2-parter. So I'm just putting in the first of both of these.